Hello and welcome to the annual WriteHive conference. This year is packed with a ton of great sessions for writers, writing professionals, and the publishing industry. WriteHive is a nonprofit serving the writing community with free and inclusive resources, events, programming, connections, and more. The 2024 conference brings you this session, Penny for Your Thoughts, Giving Insightful Critiques. My name is Hien Nguyen, a speculative fiction writer and the moderator for this panel. If you want more content similar to this topic, you can check out the Word Nerd Cafe podcast, episode 61, Mental Health Group Do's and Don'ts, Writing Groups, and Making the Most Out of Critique Groups from the 2020 WriteHive Conference. Now I have the privilege of introducing our amazing panelists for today. Ace Tilton Ratcliff is a disabled, non-binary, multidisciplinary artist whose work grapples with the discovery of self through difficult life experiences that make for bad chit-chat but damn good art. They're a metalsmith and photographer who also works in fibers and watercolors. They're a sensitivity reader and death care consultant. They have an AS in funeral services, 6 years of experience as a funeral director and embalmer, and 5 years experience owning and operating Harper's Promise, a veterinary practice focused on in-home euthanasia. The Little Book of Dog Care with Simon Element was their first book. They're represented by Stasia Decker, and you can find them at stayweirdbekind.com. Brenda Radchik is a Mexican horror writer whose stories have found a home in different places, such as Pyre Magazine, the Voices from the Mausoleum Anthology, the Collective Visions Anthology, and more. She majored in international relations, but secretly pursued creative writing until she decided to keep it no longer a secret. She has a creative writing certificate from UCSD and is currently a student in the Stone Coast MFA program at the University of Southern Maine. Justine Manzano is the geeky author of the geeky YA series Keys and Guardians and geeky YA novel Never Say Never. Known as a professional life ruiner by Antagonist, Justine's fiction is tough on the outside and sweet on the inside, like an M&M or a hard candy with a gooey center. Delivered with sass and snark, in addition to her novel-length fiction, her short fiction has appeared in anthologies Things You Can Create and Best New Writing 2017, as well as the literary magazines Sliver of Stone, the Greenwich Village Literary Review, the Holiday Cafe, Fiction on the Web, the Corpus Review, and Twisted Sister Literary. Also a freelance editor, Justine also serves as an editor-in-residence at WriteHive, a role which includes co-hosting the Word Nerd Cafe podcast and has also led to her serving on the board of the nonprofit organization. By day, she works as an executive assistant from her home in Bronx, New York, with her husband, teenage son, and beloved puppy. She can usually be found at her website, www.justinemanzano.com, or all the usual social media haunts. If you looked in all these places and can't find her, she's probably off reading fan fiction. She'll be back soon. She never takes off her many hats for too long. Rhonda Jackson Garcia, aka RJ Joseph, is an award-winning Stoker Award and Shirley Jackson Award-nominated Texas-based academic and creative writer, professor, and editor, whose writing regularly focuses on the intersections of gender and race in the horror and romance genres and popular culture. She has had works published in various applauded venues, including 2 fiction anthologies of Black female horror writers, Sycorax's Daughters and Black Magic Women, as well as a 2020 Halloween issue of Southwest Review and The Streaming of Hill House, essays on the Haunting Netflix series. Rhonda is also an instructor at the Speculative Fiction Academy and the co-host of the Genre Blackademia podcast. She is also working with Raw Dog Screaming Press, editing a new novella line, The Selected Papers for the Study of Anomalous Phenomena. She occasionally peeks out online through social media from @rjacksonjoseph or at www.rhondajacksonjoseph.com. Thank you all so much for joining the chat today. I'm very excited to hear your thoughts on critique. And so to start off with the first question, what constitutes a solid constructive critique for you?
I guess I'll start. I definitely feel like it has to have, this is going to sound really weird. It has to have something negative. I feel like something that people tend to do when they're critiquing work of other authors, particularly, is that they try to be very encouraging, which is great. And there should be encouragement involved. I'm not saying to get rid of all of that, but I feel like there's a lot of fear around offering places where things could be strengthened or things that didn't work for you when people are handing out critiques, because they don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And especially if you're an author and you know what goes into work like that, it can be hard to like really dull out the more difficult things. But don't let it be if you're somebody who is working on someone else's work, because it does really help that author. And in order to have a solid critique, I feel like while it shouldn't all be negative, I feel like definitely telling them places that they can strengthen can really do a lot for an author.
I love that. I think that's a really great way to talk about critique. I think that the negativity of critique is deeply necessary, and I think it is a skill to practice rebounding from true critique where it hurts. It hurts the ego when you have poured yourself into something and you get back that you need to do something better or you need to improve in areas. But I also think that that is just, all of this is practice. Critique giving and critique reception are just, they're skills that you have to hone. For me, one of the things that I've been practicing over the last couple of years is asking my critique partners for what I'm specifically looking for. So, hey, this is a first draft. I don't need grammar corrections here. I know it's a hot mess, or I know that my tenses are out of control. Can we focus on story arc? Can we focus on characterization? And I found that that's really helpful as I work through various edits or various rounds of a story or of a book, that I can really hone in what I'm looking for from my critique partners.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on what Ace just said. For me, a solid critique is one where my critique would serve the requester's purpose. Sometimes I know that when I work with my students, they don't actually get to say to me, Professor Rhonda, I want you to look for this, this, or this. But I do try to give them some agency in the things that they're wanting me to look for, because just quite honestly, you can spend a ton of time giving critique and then finding that the requester is just not receptive, because all they really wanted was, talk about whether or not the plot was cohesive. And so asking those questions up front, I think really helps to serve not just the person who requests the critique, but also me as the critique person. So that I don't waste time doing things that just don't matter to that person.
Yeah, I agree with everything everyone has said. I guess the key is in balance, and I suggest to always start with a nice thing. But as Justine mentioned, like don't skip the negative things. Like you can say this is not working, or I didn't understand this, or phrase it as a question. But I do think that starting with the positive makes the person more receptive to whatever you have to say.
Like, I don't know who came up with the term, but there's a term, a compliment sandwich. Um and that's, I think, the best way. Like, you're telling people, okay, I really loved your characters, like your characterization was great. I will say that I didn't really understand why A did this. Maybe that's something that you could do, but your plot your plot was really dead on, like things like that. Like, you're being positive, but you're also, but I had a little trouble here. And I think that's like a really helpful tool, because yeah, you don't want to like, I've received some critiques that just like especially early on in your career, like that just like pound you into dust, and you're just like, why do I even do this? And nobody, like, if you're really trying to give a good critique, you don't want to make someone not want to write anymore. Even when it is a hard sell sometimes. I mean, I think everyone's critiqued a story where they're like, I don't know what to say here. It's kind of bad and I want to help, but I don't know how to handle it. But I feel like the best thing to do is do find the light there, and tell them where they have skill and what they can build on. But honesty is the best policy. And yeah, I also agree with you guys that I think that it's definitely a plus to know what the person's looking for at the time, so that you're not just like bogging them down with a bunch of things that they may not care about.
I think on balance too, one of the things, if you are the person who is receiving the critique, sometimes you're just not in the space to sit down and read through a critique. And I think if you're sitting down and you're looking through the notes and you're having, for me, I get just a visceral reaction. And if I'm sitting there and all I'm having is, well, no, that's wrong, I hate everything you're saying, then I need to just take a minute, step away, and maybe this is not the time for me to go through somebody else's notes if I'm feeling particularly defensive or like they're out of line in the way that they're approaching the critique.
I don't know if I'm going like way off course here by saying, but I also think like it's important to give yourself time when you are receiving a critique, because of that, and because I feel like for me anyway, like you were saying, Ace, it does feel like at first I get very defensive about my work. Like I've spent so much time in it and I'm like, no, that's not true. And then when I get to like, I have to pull away and like wait a couple of days, I'll email back and I'll be like, thanks for the critique, and send that on my way. I won't like tell anything to the critiquer or anything that I'm thinking, but then like I kind of just like let myself have that little bit of a temper tantrum about it, and then but not do anything yet. And then once I kind of like settle, then I'll go, okay, what can I take from this? I was just being kind of bratty earlier, and I'll like let me actually like bring the critique into what I need to do. But I think it's so necessary to give yourself that space, because it's so easy if you do it with when you're emotional, like you were saying, Ace. It's like you're not going to receive everything that you need, and sometimes the critique isn't even necessarily exactly correct. Sometimes it can be, oh, they're saying that they don't understand this and I should change this, but you know what, maybe if I change this thing earlier and enhance this part, then that might help take care of that. And you're not going to see those things when you're super tied to something or super emotional about it. So it takes that space to kind of reevaluate and go, okay, yeah, I don't agree that this part was wrong, but maybe they're not receiving it because I did this.
That leads well into the next question, which is, how do you personally decide when a critique should be given or when should you refrain?
I have an answer. Don't give a critique if no one asked you. And I've seen it happen where people are just kind of talking about their story and someone's like, well, that's dumb because blah, blah, blah. And you're like, why are you talking? I didn't ask you. So yeah, don't give a critique if no one's asking you for one. They're just saying, oh, I'm having fun writing this story about this. Like no one cares what your opinion is at that point.
Yeah, I think Justine wins this question. Like that's just it. It's great that we all have these wonderful opinions. We all have these varying levels of informed opinions at that. But if we're not asked, I think that's pretty safe to just kind of leave it at that.
Yeah, I think there are some cardinal rules for life. Don't comment on other people's bodies, don't give unsolicited health advice, and don't give critique if you haven't been requested.
Yes.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that unsolicited advice is the worst kind. And I don't know, there are times where you have to give critiques, and the people there, like it has happened to me during writing courses and stuff like that, that you can tell they don't want to be critiqued, but it's part of the like a requirement. So like, if you notice that the person is very defensive, just like try to give a light critique and not spend too much time, because they won't even take it into account. So
So
in a
true.
certain way, they didn't ask for it.
Right. And it's not worth your time, your expertise, and your energy to throw yourself into a critique that someone's just not open to receive.
What I do in situations like that specifically, because I've been in a lot of writing courses where you kind of have to, and I feel bad for the person who's like sort of in the hot seat at that point, because a lot of times you'll be receptive to critiques, but not in front of everybody. So sometimes what I'll do when I see that is I'll write more down on the paper, but like what I'm saying out loud is quieter, like just like kind of take the edge off, so you're not being like they're not in the hot seat for very long, and I'll make it quick. And then there'll be like some more notes and stuff on the paper, because you don't want to, like, when it's public, it might be harder to take than when it's a private thing between you and the writer.
Oh yeah, and I think that's a great point, Justine. Because I know in my MFA program, we had to do it. Like, you sort of did sign up for that because you enrolled in the courses and paid all the money. One thing that I find helps a lot when I'm in class with my students is to do anonymous workshops. So I'll throw the entries up on the screen, on the projector. They have no names, no headers or anything, and it's up to them. And I'll tell them, look, I'm not going to tell whose paper it is. I don't know whose it is anyway. If you out yourself, that's you. But then we'll kind of go through as a group and take a look at those things. That way they get this really very pointed, detailed response from me in private. But then in person, in public, they get to hear other people say things that I may have not caught or might have said differently. So those anonymous kind of workshopping things kind of work too.
It's a great idea. I love that.
I think that's such a smart way to approach that, because especially when you're a professor, I mean, Professor Rhonda, like, you literally have the ability to make or break somebody's joy for writing when you're in that position of power as a professor. And so I think that's an exceptional way to approach it. And I think recognizing that power balance when you are in a critique conversation is really important, whether it be you are a professor or whether it be you are a more seasoned writer or whatever that is. I think that there's always more under the surface that you have to pay attention to, and it's your job in giving or receiving a critique to pay attention to that.
So, do you have any kind of advice for differentiating constructive critique from your own biases as well as subjective opinions, since, literature is so subjective?
I'm actually so curious about the professor's point of view on this, because that sounds so difficult.
That is an excellent question, and I find that first of all, acknowledging those biases is really important. So I, like, even when I'm looking at my students' work, I say to them, I am not performing an analysis or critique, if you will, over your opinions. I am analyzing the way that you support those opinions or don't. And so, I try to approach other critiques in the same way, is that I recognize my bias and then set it aside. Like, if I just really do not like stories, that are set in the desert, like, I acknowledge and own all of that. I hate sand. I don't like the heat. I don't. Okay. But besides all that, right? Like, let's put that to the side. Let's now look at what the story has besides the desert. And it's important to acknowledge that I think that a lot of times we go into critique thinking that we're being completely unbiased, but the reality is humans, we have these biases. We have to own them. So it helps me a lot to focus on looking at how they put the story together, as opposed to maybe necessarily the tiny pieces they use to put the story together, if that makes sense.
And I feel like sometimes when you have like a bias, like, for instance, I recently did an edit on a historical fiction novel, and that's not usually my thing. And I kind of told them that from the start. But it was so good. Like, it was so good. And I think that even kind of made them feel better about, like, I told them flat out, I was like, I generally don't read this. I generally don't like this, but you sold it. Like, you did it. If I'm sitting here going, I love this book and like want to read it again, then you definitely won. Like, but yeah, but you are right though. Like, I acknowledge that straight out of the gate, because it's gonna make there are differences in all of the genres that you read for critique, and you have to be aware of where you stand on them. Because if you're going to dive in and make a critique and you generally hate the elements of that genre, and then there's a chance, like, if the genre is generally a slow moving genre, or if it's very fast paced and that's not your thing, you're going to feel like you ran through it, and it could definitely affect the way you feel. So acknowledging right out of the gate that these are things that I don't really love seeing, and then, like you said, pushing it aside and going, I'm gonna work around this and see it as a story. Because at the end of the day, whatever genre are in, even though there are conventions involved there, it is still about storytelling.
I know that one of the things that I try to do when I'm reading, and particularly when I'm doing a sensitivity read or I'm reading from a specific point of view. So if I'm reading for disability, or if I'm reading for my experience of abuse, I will try to ensure that, no group is a monolith. And so here is my experience, and there's a clear differentiation that not everybody feels that way. And I might be in the minority, I might be in the majority. I'm also really big on critique to backing up. If I make a statement, that I'm going to back it up with, here are other examples of people holding that same opinion or having that same idea as me. I'm not just an outlier. So that there are, especially if you're writing for a minority group that you are not a part of, I think sometimes you can be confronted with ideas that really challenge your understanding of the world. And so sometimes it takes hearing it from multiple places for it to really settle in your soul and for you to be able to hold the critique in your heart the way that you need to. So there's a fine balance of, this is me, but also it's not just me.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love that. I love that.
A little follow-up, which is related. How do you approach giving critique for a book or story that you are not the target audience for?
I think, as Justine mentioned, you acknowledge that upfront, and then you try to focus on the craft elements and what works and what doesn't, but always, being honest that you're not the target audience and that perhaps you don't know as much about that genre as other people. Like, in the end, we are all readers, so you still have something to give them, even if you're not like the target audience.
Yeah, I try really hard not to go on record. One thing that I think is tangentially related to what we're talking about is people that do reviews for certain genres, and they very clearly hate those genres. I mean, unless it is my job, unless I am just literally forced to do so, I will rarely go on record, because I will say, and I will admit, I mean, I think that's one thing that academia and experience, age, have done for me. Is for me, I can very confidently say, this is not my lane. This is not my expertise. As a matter of fact, I don't think that it would be responsible for me to even offer an uninformed opinion on this. Now, that all said, if I had to do it, then yes, absolutely. I mean, just as Brenda and Justine said, acknowledge that up front. Like, this is not my thing. I'm approaching it more from a fundamentals aspect. And I think this is really important because uh, sometimes people will take so much of what we say at heart. And if we go into it dishonestly, right? And I think that that's what a lot of these reviews do that just make me so irate, is that they're dishonestly going into it as if they're this really big expert on the genre. And then you go, you hate it. This happens in horror a lot. Like, you hate horror. You absolutely, it is just like the loathe thing that you have for this genre is just oozing at every single word that you say. And I don't understand why you wanted to do that. But I mean, okay,
The
whatever.
number, the number
Yeah,
of reviews that I have gotten that were like,
yeah.
these characters are very childish. I'm like, you realize I'm writing for teenagers, right?
Exactly.
This is not, they are not acting like 30-year-olds who have their life somewhat settled. Like, they're teenagers.
Right.
So real. How many of us want to remember how I don't I don't want to remember how out of control and wild I was as a teenager. So yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Have you met teenagers? It's like,
It
oh
just
my gosh,
cracks me up whenever I see it because I'm just like, either you have like you had to have been a teenager at one point, but either you have forgotten being a teenager or you're like you don't have any teenage kids, or like you hatched fully formed. Like I don't understand.
Oh, that's funny.
But I do feel exactly what you're saying, Rhonda, as far as like this person clearly hates this age group. Like they don't want anything to do with like reading about them, or they just like they don't read this genre and they're just like
Mhm.
opinion.
Looking for the dopamine rush of posting a negative review on Goodreads.
Yes. Ah. I mean, there can be some advantage, right, to writing about something as part of an out group, in that you get to look at it with fresh eyes. Sometimes we in our genres become so jaded that we can't always see, these different things. But the being able to do that in a critique for something that is just not your thing is a very important skill. Like it's something that I think people should learn to do before they actually strike out and do it. Because there can still be value there. It's just, I find the majority of the time, yeah, it's not. It's just like Ace said, they just want to crack on people in public. That's not cute.
This is why you don't read the reviews, guys. Don't read the reviews. It's never good.
I think in some ways, it's a very meditative place to be able to recognize that you are not part of the target audience. But if you can actually meet the work where it's at when you're critiquing, recognizing that you're not part of the target audience, but trying to approach it with an open mind and an open heart, I think that everybody wins in that situation. Like you said, you can come to that and you can see things that, if you're someone who devours science fiction fantasy, I think that you can, as you said, become a little bit jaded to it. And so having somebody come in and have a whole fresh outlook on it can be really useful, but you have to be able to recognize where you're coming from and hold that bias like a little flame.
I mean, there's some books like you're not gonna have your target audience for critiques. Like the people who write middle grade or young adult, like unless you have kids surrounding you in your life that can currently like, which I have had friends like I've had friends reach out to my son when he was middle grade age and just be like, can you read this? Because his feedback would actually be really helpful because it was actually in the age range. But like I'm not gonna walk in like to a middle grade book and be the target audience. Like you're not gonna find another writer who is the target audience, right? But the idea is the story good? Do the characters make sense? And to try to your best to like give it a good analysis based on what you know about those types of books. And definitely you want to like try to find someone who is familiar with the age group because it is really hard when you're doing books like or children's like actually like chapter books and things like that. It's hard to get critiques that are in the actual age group. It's not like there's a professional child reader lookup.
Thankfully. Yeah, we
I
don't
mean, yeah,
want
that
that
would actually be
available,
really
right?
weird.
That's
I
kinda
didn't
weird.
think about
Yeah.
that when I
But no, that's a great point that you make, Justine. I think too that we also need to just take our egos out of this. I know a lot of times we talk about, well, if you're receiving a critique, put your ego to the side. But in giving critiques, I think we need to do that too sometimes. Like everything isn't for me. The world does not revolve around me. If I were not here in this moment, in this time, the world would continue to evolve, right? Like, and I know that's probably a real hippie kind of a thing to think, but like everything just isn't for me. And so when I read stuff, I don't go into it thinking this is for me. And if I don't like it, that means that it is terrible. Well, no, sometimes it's not for me, but the target audience might think this is great because there are other elements to it. So I think we put that ego aside and kind of just go, yeah, you know what? Everything is not targeted for me. Everything is not even for me to read. right? Like people don't write and go, well, what is Rhonda going to think about this? Like really, in the big scheme of things, I'm so unimportant. Like we're all just here doing the same things. And so when I can put that to the side, and I do wish that I saw more people do that in critique, because they make the critique more about them than they do. It says so much more about them and their proclivities, their ideas, whether they're supported well or not, than it really does about the work. So I think that taking ourselves out and focusing on that work could really, really go a long way towards giving a good, solid critique.
I think also, oh, go ahead, Ace.
I was just going to say, to bounce off of that, I think that it also depends, again, if you're looking for a really targeted critique, if you're writing something and you're looking for a very specific outlook on it, and you think that you have asked someone to critique it who may be able to give you that target, sometimes it is your job in the critique to say, I actually can't do this. I cannot provide you for what you are looking for. This is not a job that I can take on, because I'm not going to give you what you need, or I might actively hurt the narrative by adding my voice to this. And so I think, like Rhonda said, with putting your ego to the side, sometimes that literally means saying, this isn't the critique for me, but here's possibly somebody who might be useful. Let me pass you on to this person. Let me send you in this direction. I think you really have to be able to sometimes say, no, I'm not the right person.
Yeah. And particularly, I think something that a lot of majority groups can learn from that, because I think that there's a lot of that in writing from different groups, minority groups or marginalized groups, that is exactly those critiques and those reviews very much come off as being people thinking that everything should be for them. And so it's not for you. You don't have to like it. It's for it's for them. Like, just
This reminds me of like restaurant reviews when it's like 1 star at a sushi restaurant. I hate fish. It's like, okay, so
Exactly.
What did you think you were getting walking into a sushi restaurant? Exactly.
Oh man, not everybody needs full unfettered access to the internet. That's all I'm saying.
Agreed.
So to go into a little bit different direction, do you think giving critiques differ as a reader and writer? And if so, how?
I think it's kind of along the difference of what you get from a beta reader than what you get from a critique partner or like an editor. You're going to get, with a beta reader, it's kind of a surface, I'm reading the book kind of vibe. They're reading the book, they're telling you if they enjoy it, they're giving points about, oh, my favorite part was this, or I really loved, this part or whatever. But there's usually not this deep dive into like craft points and things like that, like plot elements and character voice, and like you're not really going to get that. What you're more likely to get from a reader, if something isn't right, is I didn't understand blank. And then you mess something up somewhere. And you have to kind of go back through it and figure it out. But like with another writer who is doing like a deeper critique, then you get things like the voice is kind of off in this section, and I don't really I feel like there's a plot hole here, like this part of the plot doesn't really make sense to me because they did this, but why didn't they just do this? It would have been way easier, and you never really explain that. Like, that's the kind of deep stuff I feel like you're going to get more from a writer.
Yeah, I like to think of writers as advanced readers. I mean, because the reality is you're not going to be a great writer if you're not a reader. And so you learn these, the way that language and words work by putting it into practice, and also by looking at it in practice. And so I totally agree with Justine. I think that when you are getting a review from, I mean, it's the same as like you get a review from an auto mechanic on your car. Like they're going to say this very specifically what's wrong with it. But if you ask me, who knows absolutely nothing about cars, what's what's wrong with it? Well, I didn't know, it just doesn't go, right? Like,
It's
and
clicking.
so, yeah, you know, there's something wrong with it, but if you want these details, you're going to have to go to somebody with that knowledge and with the language to be able to express all of those intricacies. And both are valuable, right? Because the auto mechanic kind of has to know that something's not working anyway in order to kind of start to pinpoint those finer things. So I think that both can be valuable, just in different ways at different levels.
I also think that if you're asking, just to really bounce off of that, if you're asking a writer to critique, you are inherently receiving a critique that is both writer and reader, because as you say, you cannot be a good writer without being a voracious reader. And those two parts of us cannot be prized apart. And so you're getting both from me when I am the one doing the critique. So I think it's reasonable and valuable to figure out which critique you're actually looking for and which version of the current, which draft you're in, I think often speaks to which audience critique you're looking for. That was a convoluted sentence that we will not try to pull, but you get the idea.
It made sense.
Yeah, it made perfect sense.
Yeah. I do think that both are super valuable. But I do also think that sometimes you discover bigger problems with those surface reads from readers, because I do feel like sometimes, like, they'll be willing to tell you, like, I really hated this character, and they're not looking at like character development and whether the arc was good. They're looking at can't stand them. And then, you know, like, if that character is supposed to be likable, you know, you screwed up. And you may not know where it was, but now you can reread it with your eye towards, like, why is this character just hateable? So it helps a lot.
I had a critique group where we instituted A, B, C, D. So A was awesome, B was boring, C was confusing, and D was didn't understand. And that's how pretty much all of the comments started, with one of those 4 letters. And it was a really useful way to approach kind of just getting it was interesting to see where people were confused, whether that was actually a reflection of the piece, whether that was a reflection of where the reader was at their point in time. You know, sometimes you get critique partners who are rushing or have not picked up the piece yet, and you're like, I know that's not confusing, or I know that's not boring. But that was a useful breakdown for kind of getting into those little nooks and crannies. From a high up level into a top, I don't know. Cut me off, I'm done.
But I think it's like, you're right though. Like, it's so important too to know how, as the person receiving the critique, how true they are based on, like, what is who the person is that's giving it to you and where they're at. Because sometimes you'll hear something and you'll know it's wrong, like, right off the bat. Sometimes you'll hear something and you're like, I don't know. And the more, if you get another opinion, and I always tell people, like, you got 2 people telling you the same thing, now you really have to dive in. When you got one person and everyone else doesn't have a problem with it, you're like, I don't agree. And you can do that, that's fine. But if, like, you've got 2-3 people telling you this character sucks, like, please, can't stand them, and you think the character is great, like, you have obviously made a mistake somewhere. And that's when, like, you have to put your ego aside as the writer that's getting critiqued too, because it's like, if you absolutely, you know, when they say kill your darlings, this is what they mean. If you absolutely love this thing, this part of your story, but it's not serving your story, having the ability to kind of see that and go, okay, how can I fix this? Does it mean it has to go completely? Or can I shift something? And that's so hard. So critiques are, like, so useful in that regard, to, like, sort of, like, point that out, that's not something you're going to see yourself.
I think the 2 most useful phrases that I use in comments and critiques are your mileage may vary and run this past another reader. because I don't know what I don't know. I have an autistic and OCD brain, and I might be getting stuck on something that 8 other beta readers are absolutely not going to care about. So I think it's really important to also know yourself as a critique partner, because it might be that what you're stuck on is really not actually that important to the rest of the readers.
So on that note, how have you approached receiving critiques that you felt weren't quite a fit? And how have you evaluated, right? Because we've talked a little bit about like, oh, this feels right versus like, no, this doesn't feel right.
I say thank you, and maybe we'll try another document together. And if we have a strikeout twice, then we're just not a good match, and that's fine.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Like, not everybody works well with each other, and not everybody has the same like read on things. And so yeah, there are people who aren't gonna fit, and don't feel bad about like, you're really awesome, you're cool, but I don't think we're like meeting eye to eye here on our work. So, maybe not, maybe we can just like continue as buds or whatever. But yeah, it's a good breakup a little bit, isn't it? Like it's a little bit awkward, but but just kind of like you move forward, you go about you go your separate ways, and that's acceptable. Like not everybody has to be a perfect match that you match up with right away.
I try to let the feedback rest, and then I kind of like, I say, okay, something is not working, and maybe it's not the character, but it's this scene. And then like, because even if they aren't, they like readers of your genre, or um like, even if they aren't your target audience, like there might be something to what they said. So sometimes their suggestions aren't right, but they are right in the like in what they say isn't working. Uh, Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it
So
does.
you just like let the work, like set the work aside, and then go back to it, and like with a critical eye inspect that section or that element that they told you isn't working, and maybe like they didn't articulate well how to fix it, but you can go from there, and then you can fix it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, there can absolutely still be useful information in a critique partner that you just don't love working with. I mean, somebody can give you a great opinion, but pass it on in a way where it just feels like a thorn in your heart. And so I think you have to evaluate, how do I pull these things apart? Can I get useful information out of this? But also, I think it's really important to pay attention to how critiques do make you feel. I think that you need to find a neutral place where you can put your ego to the side. But if you find that you're working with somebody, and in the working with that person, you repeatedly feel emotionally beat up, or you're having a bad experience where you come out and you're like, man, that just does not feel good. I think it's reasonable to say that just doesn't work, even if they are totally spot on, as they frequently are. It can still just not feel good in the delivery or the approach.
Yeah, I have learned that there are certain kinds of critiques that I just don't give any air. I mean, whether they were well intentioned or not. I remember going through my MFA program, and I mean, it was a wonderfully brilliant program. But at the time that I was going through, I was one of the few Black people in it. And so there were several things that I would get notes on in the critique sessions where I wasn't able to say anything, right? Because that's how we did the workshops. And so there were several things. Why does this character have this what is a fade? I don't understand what a fade is. I don't understand why she wouldn't be washing her hair. Or didn't they just do this thing? Or, and so I realized that some critiques come from a non-understanding. And so like, a fade is a hairstyle that a lot of Black guys wear. And a lot of Black women we do not wash our hair every day.
Mhm.
That's just not what we do. It's not a thing. You're not going to see that character going into the shower, washing her hair every single day. First of all, you shouldn't do that with any character, but especially one with hair like mine. I mean, that's just is you better show that she's going to be bald right soon after that, right? Because her hair will just fall out. So I had to learn that some critiques, even if they're not being given with malice, you just have to think about, do they serve the story? And for me, when it came to those kind of critiques, it never served my story to make my characters not Black. So, I just take those and go, yeah, well, we're going to put those in this one little pile over there that we never look at again. And we're going to take these other ones here that kind of really do serve the story. Because those people, the reality is, I tell my students all the time, their critique partners, their peer partners are not going to know what they decided to change and what they didn't decide to change. They're never going to see that final draft. They don't know who else is going to touch it. And so, like, really, it's not hard at all to just say thanks and just keep it pushing. I mean, because really, thank you. That's it. We're done here.
Thank you, and the princess wave. Goodbye.
Yeah, exactly.
My brain went right to my BA creative writing program when you said that, because even on a genre level, that happens. Like when you're in like a BA for creative writers, mostly they are MFA hopefuls, but they are writing literary fiction.
Yes.
They are white dudes that are all writing literary fiction. And being the person who likes to write weird things was not always very accepted in a college level course, because I would write like weird fantasy stories and they were like, but what does this say about the nature of reality? And I was like, it says it's a metaphor for this, and that was all it says about the nature of reality. Like I was not writing anything like metaphor. I wasn't writing anything like super intellectual. I was writing a fun story, like, and yeah, that in the same way, like on a less way than yours, it became very much like, okay, like you just don't get it. Like toss
Right.
that in the bin. It's not.
I think there's a good conversation to be had here about the role curiosity plays in just humans as a whole, both as a writer, a reader, a critique partner, someone who is receiving critique. I think that if you can approach something that you don't understand with curiosity and a questioning of, I don't know what a fate is, but I've got access to the whole freaking internet, like, take a hot minute. So again, the world does not revolve around you. But I think that if you approach life as a whole with curiosity, I think you're going to end up with a much more interesting life experience, whether that is in your reading experience or your living experience. Just show up with the curiosity, ask questions instead of assuming that something is wrong.
Or
I love that
Google
so
the
much.
questions.
Yeah.
Yes.
And don't bother the person who wrote it because you don't know.
Right. Oh my gosh. I really hope that writers, and this is not to yuck anybody's yum, push anybody off of writing, but these kinds of levels of critique, they go all the way up. I mean, so there are some editors who have actually been, like, for instance, another Black person who has said to me about my writing, I couldn't connect to this character. I don't understand her motivations. Why would she just leave her kids with this person? And I'm thinking, tell me you've never been poor without telling me you've never been poor, right? So even within in group, there are still experiences that people don't understand. And I just have to sometimes say, you know what, my work, because I am looking at class differences, I'm looking at, looking at Black femininity, I'm looking at, these other things that sometimes even, other people that are Black don't really connect with. And so, you're going to have to be prepared to tell that editor, no, I really can't change the ending of my story. The whole story is about this woman having so much power that she has restrained from using this whole time. And so for you to tell me to change that changes the whole story. I mean, thank you. I appreciate it, but I'm going to decline at this time to have this published. I mean, these levels go all the way up, so you have to be prepared for that.
And that's not an easy decision at all, to walk away
It's
from
not.
yeah, that's hard. I've had to do that with a book that did eventually get published, but it was
Mhm.
something similar, but it was about being a girl, being a teenage girl.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
it was a romance. And in that, it became a thing where they were like, oh, the two girls, they don't fight enough. They don't argue enough. Like, there's no real, I was like, because I didn't want it to be like that. Like,
Right.
the point was friendship over boyfriends or girlfriend. Like, that was the point.
Yes. Yes.
And they were like, well, but I feel like they should argue more. And I was just like, yeah, then you're not on my page right now. You need to go. Yes, exactly.
Which I think is such a shame, because again, if you approach with reading has this wonderful ability to open doors to experiences that you may never actually have in your life. That you know, I'm never going to be a poor Black woman. That's not going to happen for me. That's not how life is. But I have the ability to step into these books, and if I can be empathetic and have an open mind, I get to live an entirely different life there. And so I
Yeah.
think that it would be useful for many editors or many critique partners to also approach the stories that they're not familiar with that same outlook of, okay, there is something here that maybe I'm unfamiliar with. Again, put the ego. We just got to get rid of the ego. No ego in critique.
Mhm.
Right. And like even in I loved your example, Rhonda, like yeah, something similar happened to me that they were like, why would you write Spanish in your stories? It doesn't make sense. And and but
Man, I'm sorry for that.
Yeah.
it triggers you. It's like you can also take it as sort of a focus group thing that like it lets you see like how those people will see your work, and like it helps you think and reflect like, why am I doing this? And then you can defend it better when an editor or someone that actually matters tells you that.
That's such a great point, to be able to defend it from the inevitability of, I mean, we know that publishing is primarily white. We know that there is such a dearth of minority groups within publishing, and particularly at those, you know, upper echelons. So being able to defend it when you deal with the inevitability of those comments is really useful. And, you know, it does happen for all of these groups. The one that I end up with is whenever you write sexuality in a disabled person, you know,
Mhm.
disabled people absolutely have no sense of sexuality. We are all just neuters, of course.
Yeah, of course, of course.
So I think we fit in one more question, and I do feel like a lot of viewers are probably, you know, either newer writers or struggle to find critique partners and readers. Do you have any tips for trying to both find critique partners and readers, and also kind of figuring out if someone's a fit or not to be a critique partner with you?
As you know, I have to pitch WriteHive because like but like we have a great board for that in the main chat. Like there's the chat that's devoted to this conference, but there's a main chat for that board. There are boards for beta readers or critique partners, and like a matchup where you just kind of put yourself out there, tell a little about your story, and say like, hey, is anyone interested in swapping with me? I do think that a lot of the times when you're looking for, they call critique partners for a reason. You have to be willing to kind of give something of yourself too. So when you're talking to people, definitely try to make sure that they are people who will deliver it in the amount of time that you need, that, you know, be upfront about everything you're looking for in a critique partner before you match with somebody, because there are a lot of people. I know, I'll be honest, I'm terrible with this. Great when I have like an editing deadline. If you don't give me a deadline, you may never see it. It goes right
Disappeared.
It's the ADHD, man. It just does not. If it's not on my calendar, it does not exist.
It's in the
So-
Google
Yeah,
Doc.
So like, yeah, if you're like, you have to tell me when I get it, like I need it by blank, and then I'll be the best critique partner, but like I need to like know that. So like giving all that information at once and being ready to, reciprocate with your information about your story. And also, how I met my critique partner? I made friends. Put yourself out there, talk to people about things. You'll find people who like common stuff to what you write. And then, you just kind of fall into those situations a lot of the time through that. My critique partner and I met on Twitter, talking about different books we liked and story movies and stuff. And it just evolved into that. And we're like 10 years or so going strong. So it's all like, just put yourself out there as a writer and meet people to start with.
I was gonna say, I'm just running through my roster, and everybody except for my partner I've met online. All of my critique, the regular ones where, and I think that's one of the nice things about it too, is if you're a good match, it's usually going to lead to kind of a regular conversation where you're sharing work back and forth and you're regularly talking about these things, and there's support happening back and forth, whether that's with one-on-one or in a group. So I think that there's kind of a lovely conversation that ends up happening. So make friends, and the groups are the world of science fiction fantasy is smaller than you expect it to be. The world of horror is smaller than you expect it to be. If you're open to reaching out to people, I will tell you, reaching out to people that I'm not going to say you're always going to get a response, but if you love someone's writing, tell them you love their writing, and you have no idea where that conversation might lead you. I have ended up with long-term 10+ year relationships because someone reached out to me and said that they loved my writing and they wanted to know if I read on a regular basis, and vice versa. And at worst, you've let a writer know that you really enjoyed their work.
Right. There's nothing wrong with that, right? All of hear that.
Yeah, self-awareness, I think, goes a long way in looking for a critique partner. You have to know yourself. Like, and Justine and Ace both touched on this. You have to know, first of all, what you're trying to do. You have to understand very realistically where you are and what you're willing to do to grow or not, right? Like, and I know that might sound really crazy, but some people, they just really want somebody to look at their work and say to them, the time you spent doing this is valuable. They may never intend to publish. And so if that's how you feel, you need to let people know that. You need to be self-aware enough to also understand, like I have one of my closest friends, I use 2 people for critiques now at this point, mostly because of time, but also personality. One of them is a very close girlfriend whose writing I adore, but she also writes very fast. So whereas I may have, a short story that I want her to look at, she's got a whole 5-book series, and so it works for us. It usually looks like her texting me like, girl, have you looked at that? Girl, have you read? Have you, and are you even writing? And me kind of going, well, yeah, but I know myself. And this is why I work well with her. She knows that my pace is mine, her pace is hers. She's not afraid to say to me, girl, I cannot have you going out there looking like that. This is not working. You might want to kind of, so we have that kind of relationship. One of my colleagues that I work with is the best writing professor I know. And that is very high praise coming from another writing professor, because he has this way of working with not just students, but every writer, where he says something to the effect of, what was your purpose here?
I love
What
that.
was your goal? What was your goal in this paragraph or this section? And so I love working with him, because I know that anything I overlooked, he's not going to say, this is whack, this is not working, you need to just, whatever, quit this job here and go back to school. He's not going to say that. What he's going to say is, what was your purpose here? Or how did you envision this turning out? And so it's really important to know who you are as a writer. And when you're first starting out, that can be hard, but you just kind of meet yourself where you are. understand that if you're critique partners with someone whose output is very heavy in writing, that they may not be able to do this whole, every day turn in pages for you and critique them, or even understanding that they may be on deadlines with various editors, various publishing houses, and vice versa. If you know that you're working with a writer who writes at a slower pace and needs that time to concentrate, you have to kind of know that you're a writer who can work with someone who is at that point. So know yourself first before you start bringing other folks into your writing journey.
I think also flexibility in what critique looks like. One of the things that I've started up this year is I was trying to maintain a regular group for a while, and it was just really challenging to get everybody's schedule to line up, and not everybody wanted to commit to meeting regularly at the same time over and over. I felt a certain level of stress as a slower writer to have something new available for them to read every single week. And then I hate sitting still. This is the longest I've sat still for this conversation in the last 3 days. So that's not how critique works for me. And so I found that for me, I have accountability partners where we check in every Friday. What's your week look like? What are your goals for this week? And then we meet up maybe once every month or once every 6 weeks. And that's where we trade our pieces. And then we actually get on Zoom, and we're not talking about, we're not sitting down and looking at each other. We're working on sewing projects, or we're working on some other hand project while we discuss the projects that are the writing projects. And that works beautifully for my brain because I'm a multitasker, because I have autism and ADHD. Like, that's how I need to work through my critiques. So know yourself is really, really useful, because you have to know what kind of critique is going to work for you.
Great. Thank you all so much for the conversation today. It was really insightful, I think, and a lot of humor. So hopefully the audience also enjoyed it. So to close out, I'd love to hear more about your work, what you're currently working, as well as where we can find some of your published works. So I'll go by the order on my screen. So Justine, do you mind going first?
Sure. So I just released the last book in my Keys and Guardians trilogy, called Keys of the Dawn. That's up in the image, and I just pointed on the wrong side. There we go. It's so that's just been released, and I just kind of am recovering from that. Final books and trilogies are hard, people. It's hard to wrap everything up. But I'm kind of taking a break right now. I am very heavily editing, like freelance editing currently. And if you're interested in edits or whatever, or critique partners, you could always visit me at my website. I do have an editing section where I list stuff like that. But all my books are on there as well if you'd like to read. And hopefully I've told myself I'm giving myself a year break from writing, and then I'm going to start again in 2025. I don't know if that's actually a reliable statement, but we will see. But in the meantime, you can find all my books at justinemanzano.com.
None of us believe you, Justine. None of us.
I don't believe myself, if that helps.
No.
Brenda, do you mind talking about your work a little bit?
Of course. You can find me at brendaradchik.com. All my stories are there, and yeah, I have a new short story come up in July, from Polymorphic magazine, and I'm currently editing my novel, so I hope I can sell that soon. Thank you.
Yay.
Ace?
I am, like I said, a slow writer, and my personal life has been bonkers for the last couple of years. So there's nothing new out there besides the little book Dog Care, which came out last year and is not what I regularly write at all. But the cover is really cute. So there's that. Otherwise, I am currently working on a multi-generational queer haunted house horror story. So expect to see that in however long it takes me to write 3 books that are really history and generation heavy. Oh, yeah. You ever look at a project and think, why have I done this myself?
Well, because we need that project, Ace. Like, I'm excited for that.
Listen, I'm already like, my Kindle is right here. I'm adding everybody's books onto it. I love these panels because you always see new, cool, interesting. Yeah, Rhonda, I'm gonna find you on the internet. We'll see you guys after this. So
Yes, yes.
sayweirdbehind.com. I do sensitivity reads and edits. I should probably add a page about that to my website, but I haven't done that yet. So you can reach out to me. There's a message on the website. I quit Twitter, so mostly I'm on Instagram now.
And finally, Rhonda.
I just had the honor of having a short story come out, I think last month, in an eco horror anthology titled To Root Somewhere Beautiful, edited by the wonderful Lauren Davila for Outland Entertainment. And so that's a really exciting anthology. The cover is just gorgeous. I've kind of been on these sort of, I hate to say it like this, but the con circuit. So I've kind of been doing a lot of appearances. I am writing. I'm writing. If my agent is listening to this, I promise, Natasha, I am writing. I'm working on a nonfiction book proposal right now with her that we're really excited about. And so so I am working on that in the middle of finals. And I can usually be found on most of the social media outlets at R. Jackson Joseph. And I have a website, and this is a running joke in my circles. I've not always had a website. I've been a writer for like 1,005 years, and I just got a website like last year. So I have this website now, rhondajacksonjoseph.com, which lists a lot of my work.
All right, thank you all so much. We will be closing the event now, and if you have more questions or want to discuss things further, you can join us in Discord within the chat lounge, or ask a question in the question box. And you can also check out what events are coming up in the event announcements channel. Bye, everybody.